there's lots of things that call for our commitments. Depending on our stage of life, parents can call for our commitments, kids call for our commitments, jobs, friends, the relationships that we have will call for commitments, sports call for commitments. Everything that we do, like, it's kind of asking for more and more. Like, we're in the season, wrestling season's about ready to get started, and so like with that, it's like a change in time demand. But then there's also fundraising, and so like Simon and Samuel remind me to talk to you about the cornhole tournament afterwards. But like there's always things that are asking for a little bit more of a commitment and pushing for that. And with so many different things pulling on our commitment, like people pull us away from the things that we really want to be committed to. As Jesus followers, we are meant to be committed to God and to Jesus and to his call to join him in his mission. And Restore Church now has been around for almost 3-4 years now, depending on how you count it. And it's really been a dream or a vision of Stephanie and mine for 5 years that we've been working at this. And that's all been because we've been committed to this mission that Jesus has given us to make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. But there's so many different things that call on our commitments. There's so many different things that can make us like get distracted or pulled off that mission. And so we're going to spend the next 3 weeks talking about how we are committed to this mission and how for this church to continue going, like we need to lean into this commitment. And so today we're going to be looking at the account of Nehemiah, a man who saw a project that God had given him and said, yeah, I'm going to commit to this project. And so today that's what we're going to see, is that we need to commit to this good project that God has given us. Commit to the good project. So we're going to look at two stories. We're going to look at Nehemiah's account, which is about 2,500 years ago, roughly the year 450 BC, and what he was meant to do. And we're going to look at the project of Restore Church that started about 5 years ago. Nehemiah was happening in this stage of history that's accounted for in the Bible, where the Israelites had been pulled away from their land, taken captive, and taken into exile, and now they had returned back to Israel. But when they returned to Israel, the place in the city of Judah, it was in ruins. The land that they returned to was not the way it was supposed to be. And we're also going to talk about where we're at as Restore Church and kind of how this story parallels, I think, what God is calling us to do and what we can see from Nehemiah. So once, this good project was just a dream and a prayer. And for Nehemiah, that's really what it was, is he returned home. And like you can imagine that. Like imagine that your nation is taken captive and it's in exile for years, for decades. And can you imagine the excitement of returning home and being like, okay, we're back in our homeland. But then you get to your land and the state of it was in complete ruin. It's not the way that they remembered it. And there's a great pain. Things are still not the way that they had hoped they would be. Nehemiah had this dream and a prayer that things would be better and greater. So this is Nehemiah chapter 1, verses 3 through 7. They said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and the gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and I wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the Lord of heaven. Then I said, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps the command of love with those who love him and keeps his commandments. Let your ears be attentive and your eyes be open to hear the prayers your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly towards you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. So Nehemiah returns, and he sees this place, and it's just in rubble. The walls are all crumbling down, and so what that means is like the surrounding nations and tribes and people could could just come in and destroy the Israelites as they would try to rebuild their life, try to have any semblance of independence. And he's looking at this and he's just devastated. And he's hoping things can be better. He's hoping for a return of independence, of freedom, of joy. And so he stops and he just weeps and he mourns and he prays, God, I know that we have done wrong. There was an Old Testament promise that started with Moses that if the people obey God's commands, things would go well for the nation. God would pour out the blessing. But if the people rejected God and didn't follow God, they would find destruction, and which is what had happened to the people. And so Nehemiah's like, God, I admit, like I was wrong. Our people were wrong. My father, his family was wrong. We've wronged you, but now we're ready to follow you. And he's praying and hoping that things will be better. I was reading actually in Psalm this week, 126 verse 1 says, when the Lord restored the fortress of Zion, we were like, so speaking of this period when God restored Israel, we were like those who dreamed. And like that's why I'm saying once this project was a dream and a prayer for Nehemiah. He has this hope that things would be better, and that's the same thing for Restore Church. It's like once this place was just a dream, once it was just a prayer. In probably like 2018 to 2020, like Stephanie and I had been involved in youth ministry. It was getting close to like 15 years. And we had seen so many students who were outside of the church, outside of the faith, come and find like belonging and community with Jesus followers, and then ultimately find a relationship with Jesus and seeing life change. And I was like, man, I want this for their parents. And I saw that wasn't happening at the spot that I was at. And I was just like dreaming and praying like, God, can't you do this with all people? And that was really the motivation that we started Restore Church. And I just remember those times of like praying and dreaming and thinking like, what would it look like to have a church that's different, a church that feels like the community that I'm experiencing here in youth ministry. And like, so that was like once we were just in the spot of a dream and a prayer. So like Nehemiah and Restore Church, once this project hinged on big requests. So here's Nehemiah, and he has gone from this spot of like praying and dreaming and thinking about like what would it be like to have a community, have our nation return to its former glory. And he actually has a conversation with the king who had sent him and his people back to Israel. So we're going to pick this up. This is Nehemiah 2, 1 through 5. In the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Xerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine, so he was a cupbearer, and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So just pause there. Nehemiah is going before like this foreign ruler, and the expectation is like they would be happy and pleasant, and you'd be like, your kingdom's the best, I love everything about it. But he's saying, I had not been sad in his presence before. So verse 2, so the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of your heart. And remember, we just read that Nehemiah is seeing the state of his home country. And he's like, this is not the way it should be. He's brokenhearted of the place where he lives. Like he's mourning and weeping and praying. He's like, God, this needs to be different. And so this king, this foreign king, not an Israelite, not a follower of God, sees this and he's like, this can be nothing but sadness in your heart. What's wrong with you? I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancients are buried lies in ruin and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Like that takes courage to say that. He's like, this is why I'm feeling this way. This is why I look sad. Verse 4, the king said to me, what is it you want? Then I prayed to the God of heaven. I just pausing there, like what a cool thing. Like Nehemiah is talking with the king, and the king's like, hey, what do you need? And maybe, I think we have moments in our life like this, maybe even every day, where like someone asks us a question and we should be like Nehemiah, like we just stop and quick say a silent prayer. Maybe you're talking to someone who doesn't know Jesus and you've been praying for them for a long time, and they ask you a spiritual question, and you're like, why do you go to church? Or, you're someone who believes in God. Why do bad things happen when there's a good God? Or whatever that question is, that might be bigger than what you can explain. Like, be like Nehemiah and just like stop and pray to the God of heaven. Verse 5, and then I answered the king. So he prays quickly, and then he answers the king. If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found faith in your sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it. That's a big request. He's in the king's court and he's like, send me back and let me rebuild this place. Let me make it what it should be. Let me make it what God had promised it to be. This is a big request. And so Nehemiah has the courage to ask that. And once, when this project, Restore Church, existed, it required big requests. The way that Converge, that's kind of our denominational affiliation, does church planting is they say, like, all right, if you, as a pastor, and they look at your family, want to plant a church, you're going to have to go and like get the individuals and churches to support you. And so I was thinking about this, like, man, we must have asked at least, I must have asked at least like 8 churches to support Restore Church, maybe even more. And so I met with like hundreds of people, like many people, like just like one-on-one or one-on-two, like at a kitchen table or coffee shop, and like explain, this is why I want to have a church. This is what it could be. Like, this is what I'm dreaming about. Like a place where people who are far from God can find community. People who don't yet necessarily know Jesus can find a place to have a community where they can meet Jesus. And many people, and so I asked them, like, specifically, like, will you give financially to help this project work? And the crazy thing is, many people said yes, and they said yes because they believed that this community, this area, Muskegon, Norton Shores, like, we needed to have another community where people who are far from God could find hope and healing in a relationship with Jesus. People said yes to that request. And like, I had said, like, all my life, I've done full-time ministry for 15 years. I'm like, I'm never going to raise support. And I remember just like that spot where, like, Stephanie and I started dreaming about it, and we were like, I think we're ready to go raise support. Like, we believe in this project. But once it required just big requests. There's another similarity between Nehemiah's story and the story of starting Restore Church. The reality is, not everyone wanted these projects to work. I remember when I was a kid, like, I was watching football, like the pregame stuff, and so I think Mike Dick has said this, but I think he was actually quoting Theodore Roosevelt, but he said, show me a man who's not criticized, and I'll show you someone who hasn't done anything. I'm like, so I don't know, it's Theodore Roosevelt or Mike Ditka, or my poor memory of it as a kid, but I think that's so true about this, like, projects, is like, when you try to start or lead anything, maybe you've been in a spot where you tried to lead anything, like, criticism always follows. When people take action, there's going to be criticism. And Nehemiah experienced this. Chapter 2, verse 9 and 10. So I went to the governors and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officials and cavalry with me. When Sanballat and Tobiah, these officials, heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. Like, you can understand this. Like, these foreign people would not want this nation that had been in exile to return. They wouldn't want to see it get strong. They wouldn't want to see it get healthy. Like, they were enjoying the land. And Nehemiah is sent with the seal of this foreign king, saying, we have permission to start rebuilding our tribe, our community, our nation. And they have opponents. In Nehemiah 4, verse 3 and 4, it says, Tobiah, who was by his side, said, this is as the walls are starting to get built around the city, what they are building, even a fox climbing up on it, would break down the wall of stones. Like, can you hear the criticism? It's like, look at that wall. That wall stinks. A fox would knock that over. Like, that wall, that project that you're doing is never going to work. There's opponents. And so Nehemiah prays. He's like, hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from under your sight, for they have thrown insults into the face of their builders. Sometimes, like, maybe you feel about, like, kind of like the Old Testament prayers towards your enemies a little bit more than New Testament prayers. Like, this is pretty direct. He's like, don't forgive them of their sins, like, turn back the insults on them. But he's just being real with God. He's like, man, God, help this project to work. I have these opponents. Don't let them get us down. For those of you who know the Restore Church's story, you know that not everyone wanted this project to work. Restore Church started at Mona Shores Middle School, and we had done a whole fall of planning. We had services in January and February. We had our March of 2022, so almost 3 years ago. We launched into the middle school. We had this great launch. And a man in the community who worked for Freedom from Religion came after us, and he was and threatened to sue the school, and he's like, a church shouldn't be here. And here we are as a church wanting to promote the community, help hurting individuals and families, and we got pushed out of the middle school for that reason. We had opponents. When Stephanie and I were going to a church planting leadership training, right as we were starting on this path, there was a church planter who said, every church planter is going, and their family is going to have hurdles. They'll have a financial hurdle, or maybe a health hurdle, or a leadership crisis. And for us, it's been yes, 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 and a couple times over. There is always opposition to starting new projects. Last spring, there was a group of us that were planning how to help see new guests come to Restore Church so that they can hear the good news of Jesus. And we were kind of brainstorming and talking about different things we could do. And I remember we got done with the meeting, and Simon called me immediately, and he's like, all these things that we've brainstormed, we've done these things the last, for the last couple years. And he said, it's almost like there's more than just a strategy issue. It's almost like there's a spiritual component here that's keeping this from happening. And that's the reality with every church plant, is every church plant has a spiritual force that is trying to keep this from happening. We have an enemy, because the reality is there are good things that have come from what we are doing at Restore Church. So there's opposition to these parties. But here's again the reality that Nehemiah saw, and the reality that we need to lean into, is that God will fight for his good project. That's the hope that we see in Nehemiah. That's the hope that we need, is that God fights for his good promise, for his good project. It's the promise from God. We see this in Nehemiah 4. Verse 6, so we rebuilt the wall till all that reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. But when Sanballat came to him, all these people came, and they heard about the repairs of Jerusalem's walls that had gone ahead, and that the gaps were closed, they were very angry. And they plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up troubles against it. Verse 9. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. There's something beautiful in verse 9 that Nehemiah does two things. He's like, we prayed to God. We were like, God, we have these opponents. We need your help. But then they took guards and they posted at the wall to protect themselves. Like you see, like they're asking for divine activity and divine help. They're saying, God, we need you. But then they also do their work. And like as Jesus followers, like we have to do that. Like sometimes people will do either one or the other. They're like, I'm just going to pray, just going to trust that God will do it. And then like we don't do anything. Or it's like we lean in and try to do everything and like leave God out of the picture. And so like this is both the divine and the human project. But with this trust that God will fight for his project. And that's one of the things that I've seen throughout Restore Church's history is that this isn't just a human endeavor. Like God is fighting for this good project here. So when I was meeting with different people, one of the people I met with was Jane Breen, my brother-in-law's mom. And I actually, she was going through cancer at the time, and so I actually didn't want to meet with her and ask for money, but she was kind of in between churches. Her church was closing, and she heard what we were doing, and she was like, I would like to be interested in it. And I think she had helped, given money to help the youth ministry at the previous church I was at, and so she found out what I was doing and wanted to support it. So I went over to her living room, and Stephanie and I went, and we talked about this project, and she got behind it. She ended up joining this church and helping it out, and coming even as she was fighting this cancer battle, which she ended up losing. And we were in what was her deathbed, and I remember her saying to me, Justin, it's so amazing what God has already done at Restore Church. He's given everything we need for a church. He was talking about the music and the space. We had just moved into space, and it was still just a disastrous mess. I kind of felt like Nehemiah, seeing these walls that a fox could knock down. I don't think anything was painted. I think it was very rustic. It was not the church that I wanted it to be. And she was saying, Justin, God has already done this. And she knew that God had fought for this. And I know that to be true, that this is a church and God is doing something beautiful. But then, I know that God still has more for this place. God wants to do and can do more in and through us. Nehemiah continues in verses 19 and 20. It says, Then I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is extensive and spread out, and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. Whenever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. And he says this, God will fight for us. This is the truth that I've learned through this process, is that God fights for us. God is with us. This is the good project that I believe in. There were so many tough times. Simon and I've talked about this. It's actually there have been times where we've had 7 people in our church service, and it's kind of hard to preach to 7 people. It's a unique thing. But I remember along the way, actually seeing Jeff come in here, and I would kind of be discouraged about people not being here. And Jeff's story was he would maybe go to church on Christmas and Easter, and he's been here basically every single week over the past few years. And I just remember thinking this is why I'm doing this. Is I believe that the gospel needs to be shared, not just for teenagers, but for men and women who didn't yet know God. And this is a good and beautiful thing, and God has supported this, and this needs to continue. And that was such an encouraging thing. No matter how many people, I just saw God is making this project happen. And so the thing that I see in Nehemiah, and the truth that I see with Restore is we need to commit to the good project, even in the face of adversity. Nehemiah 6, 1-3 says this, When the word came to Sanballat and all the rest of the enemies that I had rebuilt the wall and not a gap was left in it, though up to this time, I had not set the doors and the gates. Like, so picture that, like you have the walls are all set, they're rebuilt, and they're getting ready to put the gates, which it's like, okay, they're finally accomplishing their purpose. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in our villages on the plain of Ono. Like, they're like, hey, let's have a gathering. Let's kind of like talk some treaties here. But they were scheming to harm me. So I sent messengers to them with this reply. I am carrying on a great project and I cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? Other translations will say this, like, I am doing a good work and I will not come down. Like, Nehemiah is saying, like, this project that I'm on is too important. I'm not going to stop it. I'm not going to get distracted by opponents, people that don't want this to happen. I'm going to commit to this project even in the face of adversity. And that's what I believe about Restore Church, is I look around and I see what's happening. It's like, man, there are always going to be issues and always things that make it difficult to start and strengthen this church. But I want to commit to this project even in the face of adversity. This is what we've been doing at Restore Church. We've been becoming the place that I had hoped and dreamed and prayed it would be. Alicia's story, for those of you who've been around this past year, like, is so awesome. Sora and Cece were dedicated this past spring. Alicia got baptized this summer, and like, she shared her story of how she's reconnected, fully connected with Jesus through this community. And just this past week, like, she was burdened by the SNAP project, the SNAP program being paused, and she was just knowing that there are people in the community that are hurting. And so she put out a Facebook plea like, hey, if there's anyone who is worried about not having food during this time, let me know. And I heard about that. I'm like, let's lean in. And so we had some people from Restore give money. Stephanie did a whole bunch of shopping, got some of the supplies. Other people in the community got food to Alicia, and Alicia last Monday took food to 6 different families. I'm like, yes, this is what a faith community should do, is they should come along someone and who just cares about people and who is connected with Jesus and be a light for the community. Like, this is why more churches need to exist. This is why this is a beautiful and wonderful place. But here's the reality, is we continue to have adversity, and what we need as a church, like where we're at, is we need first fruit commitments. So Stephanie and I believe in this good work. We believe in what we are doing here. The reality is, though, that we're coming up on 3 years of being a church. And so when we started our financial commitments, we were asking for churches and individuals to give 3 to 4 year commitments. And so some of those commitments, like all the churches, have fulfilled those commitments as of in December. And there are some individuals who are coming to that spot too. And so, like, the funding is going to change. And like, we've been thinking about this, praying about this, and we're like, I don't know what this means for this church, but we believe in this. And so in this next year, we're like, okay, maybe I go part-time for a little bit if we need to. But we see what God's doing. And like Nehemiah, we're looking at this and we're like, we're doing a good work. We can't stop. We can't come down. And so for these next 3 weeks, we're going to be talking about a first fruit commitment project for 26. We're really just trying to budget for next year and look at, like, okay, what is it needed? What needs to happen so that we can continue this work? And so I want to look at 2 verses on giving. One is Malachi 3:10, where it says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessings that there will not be room enough to store it. That's Malachi 3:10. This is the biblical principle of tithing, of giving 10%. And like, this is kind of God's Old Testament standard, which is kind of continued throughout the New Testament. It's how churches have existed. It's how God blesses the work. We at Restore talk about our giving pathway quite a bit, because some of you are like, you know what, I might want to give 10%, but the average American spends 104% of what they make, meaning they spend 4% more than what they make. And so to give 10% would be a 14% turnaround. Like that's tough to do. And so what we look at Restore Church is we're like, okay, here's kind of how you can move towards that. If tithing and even giving more than a tithe is the goal, like you start by being a first-time giver, and then you look to become an automatic and intentional giver, doing reoccurring giving. Maybe from that you can work towards a tithe, and then you ideally give to other places as well beyond the church. So that's kind of like the idea of the tithe and how in giving, like it's making steps forward. But what we know is that this is a good project. And like as we look at kind of churches rolling off, we're saying like, how can we as a church like lean into this project? How can we commit to this good work? And so more than the tithe, like what I want us to be thinking about and praying about over these next 3 weeks is really first fruits. Because Exodus 23:19a, and I say A because B talks about goat's milk, says this: bring the best of the first fruits of all your soil to the house of the Lord your God. So the first fruit is saying just that. Like when a farmer would harvest a crop, the first parts of that fruit they would give to the ministry. And that principle is so important because, like, as we talked about projects, like, there's so many different things that pull on our commitments. There's always someone asking for it. And so first fruit, the idea of first fruit is really saying, like, this project matters. I'm going to set aside this amount of money, this gift, this even more than that, time and energy and talents to this ministry. And that's kind of the principle that God is asking for. To commit to the good project, it's going to require sacrifice really from everyone. The sacrifice might be different for different people, but it's leaning into this, and that's what God has always done. Is He's always said, like, this is the project that matters. This is how we will do it. Is we will set aside and be intentional about what we give. As you look at 2026, like really what I want you to do, if you guys look in front of you on your sheets, or there's a sheet in there with a first fruit commitment card, and like there's a few different types of commitments that we're looking for. Is we're looking for a financial commitment, we're looking for really, like, why do we exist as a church? To tell people the good news of Jesus. We want people to invest and invite until they come. And we're looking for volunteer commitments. I don't want you to fill this out today. We're actually going to be collecting these at the last 2 Sundays of the month and the first Sunday of December. But I want you to be praying about this. It's like, what does it look like in 2026 to maybe start or increase your commitment to this church? If you are believing what I believe, that this is a really good project, a project that should be supported, a project that should not just continue, but actually like strengthen and thrive and like see more families come. Like, I encourage you to pray about, like, what can you give? Maybe it calls for a sacrifice. Maybe you need to stop buying like a mocha on a week. And so maybe that's your increase. Maybe it's bigger than that. Maybe you're like, you know what, this year I'm going to try to increase $500 a month. Or maybe you're like, this year you're going to lean in and you're going to be like, I'm going to tithe. Like, I don't know what that commitment is for you, but I just encourage you to pray about that and like look at, like, what does God want you to do? What can you do? And again, remembering like this grace picture of, like, maybe it's a first time gift. Maybe it's increasing it a certain percent. Maybe it's getting to tithing. I want you to pray about that. But here's what I believe. I believe that we should commit to this project because I believe that God is doing something special and wonderful here, and something that I want to see continue, something that our family wants to see continue. And like, we're committing to this. We're leaning in on this commitment. we need to continue to invest and invite people who don't yet know Jesus. Like, I think of like the ways that Restore Church has already impacted people. Like, I shared a story about Jeff, a story about Alicia. Like, I see God doing things. I'm like, oh man, I want to see more of that. Like, that's why we started this. That's why we leaned into this idea. That's why other people supported this. We have an individual who's, for every dollar of reoccurring giving, that's monthly dollar that's pledged during this campaign, he's going to match that with a one-time gift. So up to $2,000. So if you increase your giving $100 a month for 2026, he's going to match that 100. But that's going to be collectively up to $2,000. So just so you know, like, your money can go further. I want you to be praying about that. But I just want to end with this. If you haven't met Jane Breen, you're not going to meet her on this side of eternity. But Jane Breen, before this thing existed, before anyone was here, like, she believed in this project. She believed in this idea that another church, a new church that's committed to the gospel and committed to sharing that with people who are far from God, should exist. And she gave so that there would be a spot for people like you. This is a good project. And now it's our turn to continue to commit, to continue to give for the next people, the people that we don't even know how God could use Restore Church to reach. That's why we're doing this. This is a good project. And it's one that I invite you to put your hand in, to start your commitment, maybe to increase your commitment. But you will find a blessing in that, because I found a blessing in leaning into that commitment. We're doing a good work, and we can't come down. Let's pray, and Simon's going to lead us in communion. God, I thank you for the truths that we see today, that you are doing a good work here. And God, I know that you're a God who fights for us. I know that you have the power and the strength and the love to continue this project. And I just pray that you will carry on this project. You'll show us what we can do to continue this project. I thank you for all those who have given to this already, who continue to give. And I just pray that you will use us to proclaim your name and help us to reach those who do not yet know you, because there's life and joy in a relationship with you. We pray this all for your glory. In your name, amen.